So I'd like to talk a little bit about the ISIL topic. I wrote a blog post about it earlier, but the reality is when you are attempting to do a blog post or some sort of writing about a topic, it takes a lot longer to disseminate information than if you just talk about it. So I wanted to go over in some more detail the stuff that I mentioned a bit in the blog post, on the grounds that it needs some further explication, obviously. What I'm doing right now is leaving this Madden game that I'm playing because I thought I had left it already, but it's like, are you sure? Are you super sure you want to leave? Anyway, ISIL. So, in my opinion, one of the key factors in the ISIL topic is going to be the status quo, as I mentioned in the blog post. If you read it, if you hadn't, it's not a big deal. It's sort of a quick and dirty overview, you know. But the reason I think status quo is going to be so important is that there's a certain amount of solvency that's likely to occur in the status quo, right? Like Iraq, Iran, Turkey, they're not going to let ISIL just sit there, and they've indicated they're not going to let ISIL just sit there. They sent troops in recently to Tikrit to try to take that over, to Crete, or however you want to say it. I'm not actually sure how successful they were. But even if they drive them out, you got to anticipate that ISIL is going to do what organizations like ISIL always do, which is, to a certain extent, relocate. However, it is important to remember that one of the key affirmative points is that they gain legitimacy as a state by holding territory, and that the involvement of U.S. troops is the ability to dislodge them from that territory and to occupy that territory ourselves, and thereby allow Iraq to come back in and reinstate their regional governments and stuff before withdrawing, under the presumption that Iraq's army can hang on to the place. However, that's very much not a foregone conclusion. In the original assault on Mosul, in which ISIL took over the city, apparently there was like 1,000 ISIL members and there was like 50,000 Iraqi troops or something, or I don't know. And the Iraqi troops all ran away. And they're American-trained Iraqi troops. They always put that as an adjective in the articles, right? American-trained Iraqi troops. Well, they just ran away. They had Humvees and a bunch of like heavy artillery, and they all ran away and left all the weapons and machines to the ISIL people. So, you know, those Iraqis are that Iraqi army is really reliable. Anyway, another big neg point, of course, actually another big AF point probably is going to be Iran, which is, we don't want them to be able to come in and save the day, because that makes them seem important in the region and maybe leads to nuclear proliferation or some other outcome like that. I think in like the actual real world interpretation of things, I kind of think that's BS, you know, because first of all, it's such a tumultuous region. It's not like anybody's going to settle into decades-long hegemony, right? It's just not going to happen. And I mean, even if that were to happen and it were to be Iran, I'm not exactly sure that would be a negative thing. There's a decent reality that it would, if anything, moderate Iran. That if they were placed in the role of leadership, quote unquote, where they're sort of setting the mores for the region and what's expected of the member states, and they're the enforcer and they're the ones sending the army in if they don't like how you're acting. Well, I mean, actually having that job, like Iran wants that kind of legitimacy. Once they get that kind of legitimacy and have that job, they're not going to like that job. It's not a good job to have. It's not a good responsibility for a nation to take on itself, right? Well, we'll go around to these different places and you got yourself a warlord problem? Here we come. We're going to come in with the Marines and we're going to shoot all the warlord people. Well, I mean, even if it works and you solve their little violence issue over there, wherever it is, chances are it's not a long-term solution, or at least history has shown that such interventions don't typically solve the problem and generate a free and democratic society with free market ideals and, you know, a regulatory system designed to protect those ideals. Instead, they result in just a series of additional episodes. It would seem. That would seem to be a reasonable interpretation of the historical record, I think. But, I mean, of course, you could find examples on both sides of the argument. So, if you want to look at countries that sort of experience some sort of, I guess, good Western intervention, I mean, you can look at South Korea, right? South Korea is a good example. I mean, there's a certain amount of comparison that can be done in the sort of post-World War II world between nations that ended up on the Allied side and nations that ended up on the communist half of the Allied side versus the free market half of the Allied side. Well, I mean, obviously the non-autocratic, non-dictatorial, non-authoritarian regimes, places not like North Korea, not like East Germany, not like China, fared better than the ones that took the more statist route. So I think it just goes to show that, in fact, autonomy matters, right? And that the cultures that make the transition from, I would say, pre-globalization ideological obsession to post-globalization relativism are the ones who are able to transition from communitarian mores as the dominant normative mechanism into a respect for individual rights, whether they call it that or not, underlying whatever sort of societal more enforcement systems they have, be they criminal or just sort of extreme social pressure or, you know, whatever. So I got a little bit off on a tangent there, but the gist of it is this. We are going into another country to solve their problem. Should we do it or not? Well, we're already there with the drones. We're already there with air support and logistical support and stuff like that. And I tell you, this needs to be trimmed because it is itchy. It's just the mustache parts. These stray hairs get here and they start itching my nose. At any rate, the point is this. We're there with drones blowing these people up. Should we go in with ground troops as well? Will it be a lasting solution? Probably not. Will it be better than status quo? Probably. So there's going to be a lot of talk, really, about inherency in this topic. Like, what happens if we don't do anything? That's the core question of the topic, and I think that the framework arguments are going to be centered around that. That, you know, the neg's going to want to eliminate need-to-act impacts. Like, see how terrible these people are? They tortured these people, and they beheaded these people, and they raped these women. Well, you know, the neg and the AF should ideally, I would imagine, both agree wholeheartedly that ISIL is comprised of terrible people who have no business governing their own toilet, let alone an entire region and a bunch of people, and they certainly have no business imposing their extremist views on everybody they come into contact with. Both sides should agree on that. So then the core issue is how best to deal with them, of course. And then the core question to that is, well, what happens if we don't do anything? So I think both sides need to go into this debate with a clear predictive model as to what the status quo will generate if we were to extrapolate the current conditions out and determine what sort of impacts those current conditions would extrapolate out to generate, and then who would benefit. Would it be the U.S. or Iran or Iraq or whatever? And factor in the qualifier, U.S. interests, which means, you know, the affirmative is able to say, it doesn't matter if 20,000 Iraqis die, it lowers oil prices, and that's in the U.S.'s best interest. And the neg has a burden to argue, well, no, the U.S.'s best interests involve some sort of normative calculus where the country behaves in a fashion consistent with our values. And that's a fairly abstract impact to impact. So to wrap everything up in slightly over 10 minutes, figure out what you want to claim is going to happen if we don't do anything, no matter which side you're on. Remember to factor in the fact that it's only U.S. interests that matter. And be prepared to, if you're going to claim any kind of abstracty kind of impacts, be prepared to extend those, because I don't think a judge is going to be inclined to go with any sort of non-utilitarian impacts in this resolution unless you extend it well, right? Saying that, well, it's against international law, that's not going to win you this round on the neg, and it probably isn't even against international law anyway. So I think it's going to be a fun topic. I do. I like it. I like military topics. So anyway, have a good evening. That's my ISIL talk. Thanks for watching.